Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I share how I overwinter lavender plants. So let's go. The lavender plants I'll be overwintering are plants that I started from seed. In case you're wondering how to start lavender from seed, I have many videos showing the process. What I'll do is put links to those down in the description below, so be sure to check them out. I live in New Hampshire and I garden in USDA Zone 5B. We have very cold and very wet winters. For that reason, lavender can be a little tricky to make it come back year after year. It's important to note where you live and the kind of lavender that will thrive in your climate. There are a lot of different kinds of lavender out there. Where I live, a lavender that thrives and does well in this area is the English lavender or the Munstead lavender. In fact, that's the kind of lavender that I grew from seed last year. Earlier this season, we planted a bunch of lavender that I grew from seed up along my front walkway. That's on the west-facing side of my house, and it's important for me to try to protect those plants so that they survive during the winter. It will be an experiment, and I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that those plants survive the winter for me. Since lavender likes a very well-draining soil, one thing I'm going to be doing is adding perlite at the base of each of the plants. I could use something like sand or even small pieces of gravel, but since I have perlite on hand, that's what I'll be using. So I will be pulling back all the mulch from that area. And after I pull back all the mulch, I'll be sprinkling a nice layer of perlite at the base of each of the plants. Once that layer of perlite has been applied, I'll go ahead and replace the mulch just so it looks pretty again. The other thing I'm planning to do is take leaves that have fallen all around my yard. I'm going to put them through my leaf shredder. I'm going to shred up the leaves, and then I'm going to apply a nice layer of shredded leaves at the base of my lavender plants. Those leaves will help insulate each of the plants. There is a fine balance with protecting the plants but not overprotecting them. If you give them too much protection, what can happen is the roots can rot. So based on your climate and your weather conditions, do your research on what's the best way to over lavender plants out in your landscape. Since my lavender plants are not even 1 year old, that's the reason why I'm going through this process. After this year, I don't plan on going through all of this. They should be able to be just fine out in my climate. Another way that I've successfully overwintered young lavender seedlings is by overwintering them in my unheated garage. My garage is attached to my house, and even though it's not heated, it does not drop below freezing. Actually, during the coldest parts of winter, it usually drops down to about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I have a number of lavender plants that I started from seed that never made it into the ground. It's too late for me to put those lavender plants in the ground because of where I live. Where you live, you might be in a much warmer area and you could still be planting lavender in the fall time. Normally, in warmer climates, you can plant lavender in the fall and it's preferred. But in cooler climates like where I live, it's actually preferred to plant lavender out in this landscape during the spring months. Well, I've missed that window, so any remaining lavender plants I have are going to have to get overwintered. And since I'm going to be overwintering them in the garage, one thing I like to do is put them in soil that's well draining. I like to take used potting mix and mix it with perlite. Again, the perlite will help drain the soil. And I'll be doing 2 parts of used potting mix to 1 part of perlite. And if I didn't have used potting mix on hand, I could always buy potting mix. Just make sure you're not using the potting mix that retains moisture. The moisture retaining potting mix will be too wet for the lavender. And then once a month, I'll check on each of my lavender plants that are in my unheated garage. If they need water, I'll give them the very smallest drink of water. Too much water will rot the roots. Too little water will dry out the plant and it'll die. So I like to just check the plants on an individual basis. And if they feel very light and if they feel very dry, by taking my finger and sticking it in the soil, then I'll give it a very small drink of water. Then next spring, I can go ahead and plant my lavender seedlings out in the landscape. So remember, this video is especially useful for overwintering young, tender plants. If you have more established plants out in your landscape, you most likely don't need to do anything special with them if they're hardy out in your area. I'd love to know, what are some other ways that you've overwintered your lavender plants? Have you brought them inside? Have you put them in an unheated space? Or did you just put them out in your landscape and give them some sort of protection? I'll be sure to give you updates and show you how the plants overwinter both outdoors as well as in my garage. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.